Hello team! Today we are going to learn data manipulation language. We'll learn main statements from DML group of SQL, and we'll review real examples to help you understand how you can apply this knowledge on practice. We'll start our lesson from understanding of select statement. We'll spend significant amount of our lesson learning select statement, considering that this is probably the most popular statement that you are going to use, that has different variations and options that I believe you should know. That includes order by, where clause, distinct, search by pattern, etc. I am going to explain you different operators in SQL that you can use in your queries. We'll review aggregate functions that are often used with select statements. You are going to learn how to group result of select statement and apply condition on it. And also we are going to learn and review other important statements from DML. You'll see examples with insert, update and delete statements. Let's start our lesson. During your career as an engineer, you are going to hear very often such acronym as CRUD. It stands for create, read, update, delete. In computer programming, CRUD operations are the four basic operations of persistent storage. CRUD is also sometimes used to describe user interface conventions that facilitate viewing, searching, and changing information using computer-based forms and reports. Data manipulation language describes syntax that will allow you to perform CRUD operations on the database layer. Basically, to create, or in other words, to insert rows in tables, to read data from database, or in other words, to select rows that match conditions, to update rows, and to delete rows that you don't need anymore. And the first statement that I'd like to review with you today is select statement. This is really important statement that I believe you are going to use very often. That's why I would like to review different variations of this statement. On the slide you can see how select statement is described in my SQL official documentation. As you can see, it contains really a lot of different variations. Some of them we are going to learn in this lesson. Some of them we will keep learning in other lessons. Let me show you simplified version of select statement. On this slide you see simplified version of select statements. Let's learn it for now, and we are going to learn even more in practice. You can write select followed by asterisk, from and specify table name. Asterisk stands for all attributes. This is like mask that is used to extract all attributes of selected tuple. The next thing that you can see on the slide is example of sorting query. It is worth to say that sorting on the database side is faster, rather than extracting unsorted data and sorted in memory of the app. That's why sometimes this query might come in handy, especially when you want to implement pagination. A little bit later we are going to talk about pagination. So, to sort items on database side, you still use the same select statement, but you have to add order by at the end of the query. You should specify column that you are going to use for sorting. By default, sorting is in ascending order. That's why usually you may omit sorting order option if you are good with default sorting. But if you want rows to be sorted in descending order, you have to specify this vividly. You can sort all rows by 2 or more columns if needed. Just list columns that you want to use for sorting separated by comma. Like in the example on the slide, you want to sort all rows by field 1 in descending order and by field 2 in ascending order. Besides selecting all rows with all fields, you can be more specific. For example, after select keyword, you can list fields that you want to extract. Also, you can put where clause and specify select conditions. In this case, we need to select all rows where field 1 has to be less than 10 and field 2 has to be equal to x. I believe you are smart enough to understand that type of data in query should match with data type of the column. You can use logical conjunction keywords. You can use either AND or OR keywords. When you use AND, two conditions will be verified in each tuple, and only those that match two of these conditions will be returned. If you use OR, that means that in case at least one of these conditions is met, we return row. These are not the only logical operators. A little bit later today in the lesson we are going to review other operators too. But I would say that most of the times you would use either AND or OR. Is everything clear so far? Remember that even in case you have any questions, you can always write them in the comments to this video. And if this small piece of theory is clear for you, that means we are good to proceed with real examples and learning of new select statements. Now, let's execute these statements against data in database. And as usual, I am going to save all queries that will be used in this lesson, and you will find them in attachments to the lesson. Having the same queries will allow you to run the same queries on your own computer to understand the topic better. Before we start execute queries, make sure that during previous lessons you also created user table the same as I did. Also, pay attention that we already pasted some information here. I just changed names and emails here to make it look more realistic. Because to be able to see how select statements work, you have to have some data first. So, as you can see, the simplest query is to select all tuples from user table. And it looks like this. Nothing special, agreed? If you want to extract only specific fields, you should list them instead of asterisk, like I did here. In this particular example, I want to extract only first name and last name. Let's sort now fields by last name in descending order, and after that by first name in descending order. That is needed because we already have few rows with the same last name. Thus, sorting only by last name won't be enough, and we have to come up with additional rule for sorting. I add order by keywords and specify columns that I want to use for sorting. Let's execute this query. Now, let's add condition. I'd like to extract all rows where last name is equal to Ivanov. I write where clause and specify condition. And after we executed queries, we received only rows that meet our condition. Regarding operators, in MySQL you can use different operators. As I said, let's discuss operators as a separate topic a little bit later today. But in short, talking about comparative operators, nothing special. You can use more, less, more or equal to, less or equal to, not equal to operators here in condition. One more important thing to show you is distinct keyword. For example, you need to extract all different last names or names from the table without any duplicates. You can use distinct keyword near attribute to receive only different values. Like in this example, when we execute the query, we don't receive any duplicated last names. Does it make sense? Now, let's imagine that you forgot what you are looking for, and you don't remember the search parameter. But you remember that last name of the user is started from if. How to find what you need? You can search by specified pattern with like operator. The like operator is used in a where clause to search for a specified pattern in a column. There are two wildcards often used in conjunction with like operator. The person sign represents 0, 1 or multiple characters. The underscore sign represents 1, single character. In our specific case, when we want to find all rows where last name is started with if and we don't know the full last name, we need to use person sign. Look at this query. By this I am telling that after if there might be different number of characters. Let's execute this first query. And you can see that I have two tuples returned. In other query, I am saying that there is one character that is followed by we, and after that we have different amount of characters, and I don't know how much exactly of them. Is that clear? Let's learn what pagination is and what we need to know to support pagination on the database level. Pagination is a method of dividing web content into discrete pages, thus presenting content in a limited and digestible manner. Google search result page is a typical example of such a search. If you downloaded applications that I created for my students for mobile phones, Learn IT, you can find example of pagination in the history. If you have a lot of tests and certifications passed and you open history inside the app to explore your previous results, you can scroll test results, but not all test results extracted from the database at once. They are loaded in chunks after you scrolled to the lowest record. I extract records from a database by small chunks, instead of extracting all related records at once. Do you understand? Imagine that you have 100 or even 1000 test results, but you need to check on the few last ones. In this case, is there any sense to extract all rows and pass them from the server into the mobile app? Definitely not. That's why during the design of our app, we foresee that we need pagination support here. And to be even more specific, in mobile apps, this is called infinite scrolling. This allows you to scroll content down without any interruption. Infinite scrolling is a functionality allowing users to scroll down a massive amount of information, presenting it in easy-to-consume chunks. And data is uploaded as you reached the lowest record on the screen. I am sure you're faced with such design while using other apps. In database, we can support pagination by extracting specified range of records with the help of limit operator. The SQL limit clause restricts how many rows are returned from a query. The syntax for the limit clause represents how many records you want to retrieve, and starting from which record. For example, you can use the limit clause to retrieve the top 5 users by number of coins. Or you could extract users starting from the 6th position to 10th sorted by number of coins. The limit clause is only compatible with the SQL select statement. You can't use a limit clause in SQL update statement, for instance. Your limit number must be positive. Say you want to retrieve records from the bottom of the list. You should use the SQL order by statement to order them in descending order. Then you should use a limit statement. Let's learn how to work with limit statement on practice. We have 3 records here. Let me extract 2 users sorted by email in ascending order. I write select all from user order by email, limit 2. The last part, limit 2, means that it would return me 2 records only. Let's execute this query, and you can see that records with ID 3 and 4 have been returned. But as we have already discussed, we can specify offset via additional parameter. In the second example, offset is 1, so we are skipping the first one returned, and we return 2 records after the first one. Does it make sense? So we return 2 records after skipping the first record, basically from the second position of our ordering. And now, when we execute this query, we have records with ID 4 and 1 returned. Is it clear for you why this is happening? And when you implement queries for your app, you can build them accordingly. For example, you can pass to the server parameters of pages that you want to retrieve and number of records, and paste them into the query. Anyway, this is not the topic of this lesson, it is just a hint. We'll learn how to implement this when we'll start learning of web application development. As of now, I want you to know and remember how to work with limit statement. The next thing that I'd like to review with you is querying the null attributes. This is minor thing to learn, but still very important. And a lot of my students do the same mistake when they just start using SQL. If you want to select tuples that have null value in some of the attributes, you can't just use equal operator. Let me show you. If you want to select users that have null value in the FK user role field, you can't just use equal operator, because it won't give you results that you expect. Instead, you have to use another keyword. You have to use isNull or isNotNull. This is specifics that you should be aware of, so please don't forget about this. We already reviewed few examples and I believe you understand how to work with select statements. But still, another thing that we need to learn is different operators. Definitely, there is no sense to hold live demo of select statement on real data with each possible operator. Instead, probably there is a sense to learn different operators now. I will also provide you with examples of how to apply different operator. Let's start from the first group of operators in SQL, arithmetic operators. Basically, there is nothing special, and no signs that you didn't learn in elementary school. The only exclusion is modular operator probably. But if you are familiar with one of the most popular programming languages, then you already know that usually person sign is used for operations to extract remainder after division. If you need few more seconds to review examples, please press a pause. Let's continue. Another group of operators that we are going to review is comparison operators. Most of them are also familiar to you. Probably not equal to operator may look like the new one for some students. Basically, the general rule is not equal to operator is written like this. But also, in some relational database management systems, it is also possible to use another syntax of not equal to operator that is more similar to one that we use in programming languages. And on this slide you can find logical operators. We already reviewed such logical operators as AND, OR, like. But as you can see, there are more of them. Look through the table on the slide. Press a pause if needed. And ask questions in comments to the video in case something is still not clear here. Now, let's learn aggregate functions. Again, we'll use them with select statements. That's why I believe it is better to review them in conjunction with select statements. An aggregate function performs a calculation on a set of values and returns a single value. Except for count, aggregate functions ignore null values. Aggregate functions are often used with the group by clause of the select statement. And here on the slide you can see product table example that I'm going to use for the explanation of the following aggregate functions. Let's start from the learning min and max. Based on the name of these aggregate functions, I believe it is easy to understand that the first one returns minimal value in the column and the second one returns the maximum value in the column. And on the slide you can see example of queries executed against table with products. We extract max and min price. The next aggregate function is count. The count function returns the number of rows that matches a specified criterion. You can also find query example on the slide. The average function returns the average value of a numeric column. The sum function returns the total sum of a numeric column. Is everything clear? Let's learn now group by keywords that are often used together with aggregate functions. The group by statement groups rows that have the same values into summary rows. It is often used with aggregate functions. The group by statement groups rows that have the same values into summary rows. It is often used with aggregate functions like count, max, min, sum, average to group the result set by one or more columns. Let's review this on real demo. We are going to demo group by statement on example of user table. Let's find the most used last name among our users. We know that last name in our app is not unique, and we want to understand how much users used the same last name. I want to select total count of all rows and display this count as a mount attribute, and also I want to extract last name from user table and group results by last name. Let's execute this query. You can see that we have two people with Ivanov last name and one user with Komarokov last name. And in the result set, count has been returned as a mount column. When I wrote this query, I used this alias automatically. Because when you use aggregate functions, you also want that column would have meaningful name. The syntax is simple. You use as keyword and specify the desired attribute name. SQL aliases are used to give a table or column in a table a temporary name. Aliases are often used to make column names more readable. An alias only exists for the duration of that query. An alias is created with the as keyword. In MySQL, I usually omit as keyword and use alias straight away. We grouped our result by last name and managed to receive result like this. Hope that this is clear now. Another interesting thing that when you used group by keywords, you can apply condition to groups. To do this, you have to use having keyword. In very simplified words, having is the same as where in regular select statements. The difference is that you can't apply where after group by statement, because where is applied for each tuple while reviewing each record, whereas having may be applied to the group of tuples once we iterated over records in table. Where clause introduces a condition on individual rows. Having clause introduces a condition on aggregations. Does it make sense? From DML language, we have few more important statements to learn. Let's learn insert statement. Basically, this statement is used to insert new record in a table. The general structure of insert statement looks like this. Insert into table name, list of columns where you want to insert values. After that goes values keyword and list of values. This is the most common syntax of insert statement. But definitely, there is also a way to make simple things more complex. Just joking. But indeed, there might be different variations of insert statements. In attachments to the video you will find link to the official documentation about insert statement in MySQL. The next things that you have to remember about insert statements. Insert specifies the table where data will be inserted into. We can omit column. If a column is omitted, each value must be provided. If you are including columns, they can be listed in any order. Values specifies the data that you want to insert into the table. Values is required. Inserting an empty string into a varchar or text column inserts a single space. All trailing spaces are removed from data inserted into varchar columns, except in strings that contain only spaces. These strings are truncated to a single space. If an insert statement violates a constraint, default or rule, or if it is wrong data type, the statement fails. and SQL Server displays an error message. Let's insert few rows in our user table. On the screen you can see example of insert query. We want to insert 2 records. Pay attention that one record has FK user role value specified, and another record doesn't have. The number of values should match the number of columns we listed. Let's execute query. Insert statement returns us the number of how many rows have been impacted after execution of this query. We impacted 2 rows in total. Now we can select all rows in our user table and make sure that we inserted 2 records. Is it clear? If yes, then let's proceed. The update statement is used to modify the existing records in a table. The general query structure looks like this. You start with update keyword, after that specify table name. After set keyword, we need the list pairs of column name and related value, separated with comma. Optionally, we can specify where clause to select rows that we want to update, and we can apply limit. The where clause, if given, specifies the conditions that identify which rows to update. With no where clause, all rows are updated. If the order by clause is specified, the rows are updated in the order that is specified. The limit clause places a limit on the number of rows that can be updated. In our example, we decided to change email for our user and assign a new role for him. In example, you can see that I assign a new value to email attribute and to FK user role attribute. I use where clause to update only one row. I have unique identifier in this table. That's why in where clause I use ID. Let me execute this query. Update statement also returns the number of updated rows. We successfully updated one row. We can check our table to make sure that email and foreign key value is changed. If everything is clear, then let's move on. And the last but not the least for today, delete statement. The delete statement is used to delete existing records in a table. One important thing to mention here is that in case you would omit where clause, you would remove all records from the table. So be very attentive with this query. According to documentation, you can also use order by and limit keywords. In our example, we decided to remove one row. Here is how query look like. I specified ID of the row that I want to remove. Let's execute this query. And you can see in logs that delete statement also returns number of rows that were impacted with this query. That's all I wanted to share with you in this lesson. Let's recap what we have learned today. In this lesson we learned select statements. I showed you select statements with different options, including selecting rows with ordering, where clause, distinct selection, search by pattern, limit the number of rows to be returned, grouping, and applying condition on groups. We learned different SQL operators. Now you know what aggregate functions are and how to work with them. I showed you how to work with aliases in SQL. And also, we discussed insert, update, and delete statements. That's all for this lesson. Thanks a lot for your attention. Have a great day and see you in the next lesson.